All right, so thanks for coming out early Sunday morning. Give yourself a big hand for the... All right, so I noticed I've been here most of the week, and there's a lot of offense-focused talks, and so I've really spent most of my career on the defensive side, although if any offensive people are hiring, might want to come see me after this talk. But I spend most of my time on the defensive side, and it's a pretty boring side to be on, but it's also very hard. But then this whole new, threat intel field came out the past few years, and at least on the defender side, it makes it at least somewhat interesting. All right, so here's a disclaimer. So I'm representing myself here, so don't sue me. But I have about 20 years in information security. The past 16 have been focused within InfoSec. The previous 4 years was just general IT stuff, and I spent the past 5 or 6 years working in SOCs. So doing a lot of just really fun stuff, either working in them, training, or trying to lead them. But as you can see, all the little pictures going around there, I've done a lot of things. On the top left, I started out doing web security stuff / pen testing. And then I got into a bunch of boring stuff like security engineering. And if you work for the government, got into doing FISMA stuff. And then they found out I could write and said, hey, well, you have to help us like lie in our proposals. And I'm like, all right, cool. If you want to pay me, sure. But after a few years, I kind of got bored with that, and I wanted to go back to doing more technical things. So a few years ago, it's really hard to take a step back and make the same amount of money. But somehow I continue to get lucky and basically find some good niches to get into. So I started doing trade studies, looking at things like SIMs and guards and fun stuff like that, and just doing an analysis of all those and creating nice little spreadsheets so that people could weight what requirements are important to them, and then that would help them pick the right solution. But then, like I said, I've been working in SOCs for the past few years, just really fun. A lot of my work previously was more in the development and engineering side. So whenever I got to doing the ops type work, it was just such a different world, very exciting. And most recently, I just switched jobs, and so I'm in a training position now. So just going around doing some fun stuff, training people on things that I'm not allowed to talk about. All right, so for the past 8-9 years now, I run this site called novainfosec.com. So it's just a plug for that. Through that, I might do some side consulting too. So just want to plug that. Please check it out. You can follow it on Twitter. It's at novainfosec. So, all right. Well, so to jump into the stuff here, just give you a little bit of background. So like I said, I was working in SOCs, and and a few years ago, threat intel started being this big thing, and so I really wanted to take advantage, and because it was just so much more exciting than just an alert pops, do a quick investigation, and then they re-image the box and move on. So it was just sort of monotonous. So I wanted, just to add a little bit more excitement to it, except the organization that I was working with was just like, well, no, we don't do that. And they weren't about to give me like my own box or hardware to do things on. So I was like, all right, well, I'm going to build my own and just do it for the fun. So, I was looking for something that, I wasn't going to put like sensitive stuff there, but I wanted something that could be hosted externally. What else? And then, but I could access it from anywhere. So essentially, I was looking for this big bucket of stuff that I could just dump in, because initially I was really into trying to collect a lot of the OS int stuff, all the feeds and stuff that are out there, and just throw them into a big bucket, and at least having this one source that I could go and just search on and see, like, if an event pops, then maybe I could search my little store to see if I could gain any additional insight. So I was looking for this bucket that I could just dump some stuff into, you know, and the various things that you could put, you know, that maybe they could be people writing blog posts, maybe they could be things like RSS feeds. Periodically, there are a lot of blacklists and stuff that are pushed out. So being able to take those files, detecting when they change, and popping them into this big bucket. Or just anything else. You know, the vendors come out with a new APT report, you know, trying to just grab that and just jumping it in there, and being able to make it searchable too. So the other requirements that I was really looking for was that, you know, easily find data. So I wanted, you know, search, just dumb and simple search, you know, being able to go and to search on an IP, domain, whatever, and, you know, basically learn anything that, anything interesting that can help me do my job better. But just some other just general, I think, like database type things or properties, you know, have it being, you know, you can categorize things. And then one of the things that I really like, and I think it's a very powerful technique, is tagging. So being able to just randomly add interesting ways of classifying data, and then using those tags to slice and dice the data that you do have in more interesting ways. So I was really into Evernote at the time. I was really psyched about it. So I really liked it because it really met this requirement as being this big bucket of things that I can just dump stuff into and then search it later. And it had this really advanced tagging feature, so you could randomly tag stuff. And where I learned a lot about that was this interesting getting things done method. Is everybody familiar with getting things done? That was sort of like the rage about 5-10 years ago. So I'm still there. So is everybody familiar? Who's familiar with getting things done? All right, so it's basically like a to-do system, but it's, you know, IT geeks tend to go towards it, and it's fun. So it's a good way of classifying things. But one of the things, one of the things that I really liked about it is it got me thinking about Evernote in a totally separate way, because it's, you know, every, I guess, notebook you could think is almost being a table in a database, and then every note is essentially one row. And it had all those features that I was looking for. I could have, you know, tags, and I could put data in there, and it was very searchable. So I really liked it. So then I basically started adapting Evernote into being, well, initially I just called it this big data dump thing, but then a few years later I learned that there's a cool term called threat intelligence platform. So now I can call it TIP. And it's still good, and I learned a lot of great lessons there. I still use it. I think it's just fun. You know, I personally don't have anything big that I'm trying to defend per se, besides like a website. So, but I have some automatic feeds and stuff pushing into it. Initially, with like the original goal of taking the OS in and just dumping it in. That kind of seed of how this whole thing started eventually failed, because Evernote just starts, like after about 80,000 notes, Evernote just runs to a crawl. And so I essentially had to like dump a lot of, or delete a lot of stuff out of there, reinstall the whole thing, and get it to work so that I could use it for day-to-day purposes. But it was a fun experiment, and it really got me thinking about, you know, the whole threat intelligence process and how we could do something on our own. But in the long run, you know, I don't think, you know, for anybody looking to build a threat intelligence platform on the cheap, I mean, yeah, you could use Evernote, but your management's going to probably have a huge fit. So looking at, you know, like the next steps, we're looking at, you know, taking the lessons learned that I had here and looking at where we can go. So I think you know what. I don't want to call this like a war per se, but in a battle, right? So really, so what's a quote? What's a presentation about something like this without a Sun Tzu quote? So, and this is the traditional like if you know your enemy, you're going to win the battle type thing. And so. And essentially that is a big part of what threat intelligence is, you know, being able to know as much about your enemy as possible. Now, I searched around for a good definition of threat intelligence, and so this is one that I found from Gartner. So threat intelligence is evidence-based knowledge, including context, mechanisms, indicators, implication, and actionable advice about existing or emerging menace or hazard to assets that can be used to inform decisions regarding the subject's response to that menace or hazard. Does anybody understand that? All right, so for $200 more, you can get a 4-page report that describes what that says. So basically, you know, this is my kind of real-world definition here. Is it's actionable information that you can use to detect or stop the bad guys. And I say information there because there's a big difference between, you know, data and the information that's coming from that data. So there's a lot of feeds that you can buy now, and I consider that, you know, really threat data, not threat intelligence. But we'll talk about that a little later. So is everybody familiar with this model here, this pyramid of pain by David Bianco? So this is the quintessential, I don't know, I think he put this out in 2013 or 2014, but it really, you know, for a technical guy like myself, this solidified what threat intelligence was. And so, you know, in the way he organized this was that, you know, stuff that's easy to get all the way up to really hard stuff. And so you start out with trivial stuff, just, you know, hash values, IP addresses, we're all pretty familiar with that. Domain names / URLs, network / host artifacts. So, and even tools, like anyone in this room can probably figure out what I'm talking about there. But whenever you get to TTPs, that's where I think more of the threat intelligence comes in. So like I said, I classify this as, you know, the bottom portion of this grid is more, you know, threat data, and the top part is more threat intel. And, you know, a lot of what you're buying today really isn't threat intel, it's more threat data. So I wish the vendors would start using the right language, but then that doesn't sell. So really there's this whole process that you have to go through, and this is kind of an overview diagram on the right there of a process for doing traditional intelligence analysis. And so you really take all the information that you have and you do this whole process to it, and then out of that you get this trickle of intelligence, which are really maybe you know, your TTPs, your how your enemy does things, you know, really understanding what they do. Now, a lot of what you buy out there, like I said, is threat data. There's some good. It's definitely good for like I see it as very useful in if you're just using it for broad-based attacks. For example, if there's a like a Zeus C2 or CryptoLocker, like a website that's pushing that. I mean, in those cases, just for those broad-based attacks, that sort of data works well. But the problem is that a lot of these feeds, they're just sort of combinations of open source feeds and where their analysts look at it very quickly, and a lot of it's pretty low quality. So you end up with tons of false positives, and it's sort of a war there because you have your analysts already busy as hell, and then they're chasing out all these false positives. So you have to be very careful whenever you use data like that. I mean, it's definitely useful, but the hard part is figuring out the stuff that that is going to be useful to you or is relevant to your network. And in terms of relevancy, the way that I see it is, we have this universe of external threat data / intel, right? And then we have your organization. And so maybe there's, there's stuff going on in your org that probably isn't out there. And so maybe there's this little overlap. So you're buying this big threat intel feed thing, and you're getting some value out of it. But, really your goal is something like this, where you want to be having threat intel that you're buying or creating, and you want it to be relevant to your org. And so really the only solution is to take it in-house. I mean, you cannot outsource threat intelligence. You have to have the people that are familiar with your network, understanding who your potential adversaries are. The only way to really do this, if your organization wants to do threat intel, or if you want to do it on your own, you really have to use the data that you have internally, because that's going to generate the most relevant intelligence for you. So, and the other thing that of why you would want to create it internally is keep analysts happy. There are working in a SOC or someplace like that, it's a very monotonous, boring job, and you can burn out really easily. And so adding, giving analysts a chance to, step back and, not be judged on the number of tickets that they open or close, really stepping back, looking at the big picture, seeing if they're seeing trends across tickets, or reading about something on the internet and then seeing, oh, well, is that attack affecting our org? So it really helps, keeps your guys happy. So and just minimizes the burnout that's associated with this, or with these types of jobs. All right, so that's just a quick overview of what threat intel is and is not. But I mean, I think the big question and why you all came here was, well, how can I start doing this cool thing? Whether it be supported by my organization or not. So I have 7 steps here to get y'all started. So the first one is really get the basics first. This is a nice little meme that I found. It was Black Hills InfoSec. I forgot to put the reference there, but really, if you have a shitty security posture and you try to throw threat intel on top of that, it's really not going to help you too much. So you really got to get the basics done first. I mean, just simple stuff like don't run as admin, change default passwords if you're on a Windows systems. Run Emmet, keep your patches up to date, run basic. I don't want to say antivirus, but maybe endpoint security solutions that happens to incorporate antivirus. Because that gives you, because that incorporates local host-based firewalls and IDS systems as well. So it's all very useful. And the reason why you want to do this is because there's a lot of data that you need to do threat intel, and you need these basic security mechanisms set up so that whenever you're looking at things, you have the data to reference to dig into these cases a little bit deeper. And obviously, there's the network aspects of that too. So things like, hopefully, at the host level, but also at the, things like firewalls and email type logs and stuff like that. So all these logs are very important. So hopefully, you got that going. So step 2 is identify, some portion of your team that's going to focus on threat intelligence. Does everybody like pumpkin pie? I love pumpkin pie. It's awesome, especially when you put a little bit of whipped cream on there. It's awesome. All right, so some portion of your team, and for all of you, my portion's on the right-hand side, so some portion of your team has to focus on this. Now, there's many different ways. Maybe there's people that within your org that are just, hey, they're a 9-to-5-er. They just want to come in and do their job and go home, and their goal is to just write tickets and move on, right? And so maybe those aren't the right folks, but then maybe you have people within your organizations, probably people that come to conferences like CarolinaCon, that are really into it and really want to dig deeper. So if you have something like that set up, maybe it's worth it, sectioning off part of that team. Maybe you want to do something like, all right, out of an 8-hour shift, maybe 2 of those hours can be focused on, stepping back and looking at the big picture. So just whatever fits for your organization, definitely do that. But just figure out, some part of their job each day is associated with doing threat intelligence type stuff. All right, so the next thing you want to do is, most people in the org may not know that much about threat intel. So where do these people start out? So, the first thing to do is just do a search on the internet for like APT reports or whatever. The vendors come out with them all the time, and start reading through those and identifying, analyzing that and looking at how they did their analysis, how they broke the attack down. And, and another big part of that is saying, well, if this threat actor associated with this campaign would have attacked us, would we have been able to detect and or stop this? And you can use information like this to go talk to your leadership to basically say, hey, well, if they would have attacked us, we would have been blind. So you can use that for maybe get funding. But just really get out there and start reading, get involved in the community. I think something that I want to add in the future here is like maybe a good list of folks to follow on Twitter and blogs. I have all that stuff. I just don't have it in this presentation yet. So the other part of this is training. And really there isn't, I haven't really found too many training programs that focus on doing threat intel. Of course, SANS came out with one, I think about 6 months back. So, that's probably a good place to start. But if you don't have, $5,000, then I don't know what you're going to do. So, but yeah, then there's take part in industry events. So there are a few threat intelligence-based conferences that you may want to get involved in, or there could be mailing lists. You basically just jump in feet first and try to learn as much as possible about UCAN. So basically all this knowledge that you have, the next thing is to pick an analysis framework. And this is the key. As you do your investigation, this is going to lead how you do your investigations. And it's also going to allow you to pluck data out of your traditional investigation and at least kind of put that information in buckets so that you can look at the data in different ways. All right, so we're gonna play Name That Chain. So can anyone guess what the top left one is? Yeah. So that's the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. Anyway, what about the one on the right? What? The squirrel? Did you say squirrel? No. Yeah. So that's a diamond model. And then what about the one on the bottom left there? This is a newer one that I actually just saw like about 2 months ago. And you guys, I wish I had candy. Like when I teach class, I usually have candy that I can throw out whenever people answer questions. Yeah, so this is, I guess, JP Morgan, they came out with a fraud kill chain. So like I said, I just saw that about 2 months ago. And then what about the bottom right? This is one that you may have seen. Yeah, so this is the Gartner one, and they call it the attack, like the Gartner's cyber attack chain, right? So I think a lot of people, industry as a whole, has really gone to the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. There are definitely some criticisms of it. You know, and also with any of these models, you know, none of them are perfect. So there's some other ones here if you guys want to, and this is good because you can take these back and figure out like, hey, which one of these works for me? So does anybody know what the one on the top left is? Nothing? All right, so that's the ICS kill chain. So they have a kind of a two-phase approach. You know, the first phase is just getting in, and then the second is, you know, hey, well, there's this particular ICS system and developing an attack associated with it. Well, what about the red one in the middle? I didn't have room, so I had to do it vertical. Is anyone in incident response here? Okay. Does it look familiar? Pick a roll? No. Yeah. Well, it may be, but so this is Mandiant's like attack life cycle. You can tell by the color, right? And then what about the one on the right? The Firesight? Yeah. All right, so this is the insider kill chain. And anybody have any idea of what the bottom one is? So recon, delivery, exploitation, C2, action, exfiltration. So what's another big industry thing that's been going on for the past few years that everyone's complaining about? Fake TV shows, yeah. No, so this is the cloud kill chain. So basically there's a kill chain for everything. And, you know, and none of these are right. You know, what I encourage you is to go out, study these different kill chains or models, and, you know, figure out what works for you based on what you see in how the adversaries are attacking you. So just pick one and start with it. And maybe it's not the perfect one, and you can adjust it as time goes on. But it really gives you a nice way of allowing analysts to, you know, dig deeper in what's going on. All right, so the model that I, like if I was to create my own kill chain, I would probably do, you know, like the Lockheed Martin one just to start with. But the Lockheed Martin one, you know, you basically just fly through. It's like recon, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, install, C2, and then bam, action on objectives. You know, so the first part of that happens like really fast. And then action on objectives could be days, months, whatever. So I think there need to be like a few steps in between C2 and action on objectives. In most cases, action on objectives means that you're either going to, in most cases, it's that you're going to exfil data. But that's not always the case because you could go in and manipulate data too, depending on what your goals are. So I kind of took that and I looked at, especially the Gartner one. You know, Gartner tried to take the Lockheed Martin kill chain and add a few steps in there between the C2 and the exfiltration steps. And I kind of like some of the naming or some of the wording that they used in the fraud kill chain. And so I just came up with this one last night. So, you know, and I added in, it's basically the normal CKC with position and access. So position is like, hey, I'm gonna, you know, move laterally within the network. Maybe I have to raise my privileges to do that, and then in gaining access to it. And then the last phase could either be, well, once I have access, I'm either gonna, you know, manipulate it or I'm gonna try to exfil it. But that's just one. But I encourage you to just go and just look through all these and just create one, make it up yourself. Take the best of the ones that you like and just start working with it. So the next, like earlier when I was talking about Evernote and how we have the fancy name of the threat intelligence platform now. And so this is where I'm going to spend a good amount of time here, because I think this is the where you really need to focus. A lot of that other stuff can go pretty quickly, but this trying to decide what sort of platform you're going to manage all this data in is important. So I went to Gartner again, and Anton Shivakin had a nice definition of what a threat intelligence platform is. So it's so it collects threat intelligence data, it retains it for analysis, and it allows functions so that you can normalize and enrich it, and then you can link the data in different ways. And of course, search and a query interface so that you can find stuff quickly. And then lastly, distribute and disseminate data so that if you would want to share with providers, or reformat the data in certain ways so that you can push it out to the countermeasures that you have implemented within your infrastructure. So Threat Connect, that's just another company that does threat intelligence. They have, like a simpler description where you're going to aggregate it. So it could be OSN, it could be commercial stuff, or it could be shared, and then analyze it. So they have a lot of different ways of linking the data so that you can analyze it and pivot around to discover things, and then act, what you're going to do with that. So getting back to my fun little Evernote experiment, and you can't really see on the left-hand side, but that's sort of what it looks like. On the right, I tried to blow it up some. But essentially, I created this, grecs tip, and I broke it down into just through trial and error, like investigations, because I think a lot of your intelligence is going to come from the investigations that you're currently doing. And investigations includes more than some alert that popped up. Maybe it's some new attack that you read about on the internet. Additionally, maybe it's you're part of an information sharing partnership and you get some intel that way. So investigations encompasses all those. And then lastly, or then second, putting everything into campaigns, and then finally trying to map the different campaigns to adversaries. And then using the getting things done secret weapon thing that I told you about earlier, being able to come up with this hierarchical tagging structure so that you can kind of categorize the data in different ways. So, based on priority, using the secret weapon uses sort of a who, what, why, where type structure, and then there are subtags associated with that. So when is maybe the priority that you're going to associate with it. Where is, I kind of look at that as is more like in the secret weapon, it's more of kind of like, oh, I'm at the grocery store, and when I'm at the grocery store, I need to get bananas. But here I interpreted it as is sort of where in the workflow process, maybe there's an inbox, maybe there's something that's currently active or being worked, and then there are things that are closed. And then so these are the different, they're kind of like projects, but so I use this if you're going to try to break things down by, investigation type, campaign type, adversary type, and indicator type. And then there's also who, which is essentially who worked on it. But this is, just a really, works in very simple situations. So I came out with this, like last year I was presenting on how to use Evernote to do all this. And I came out with this very complex structure where I was trying to take Evernote and it's going to be this OSN database, and I'm going to have another table for sharing, and it's going to collect logs, and I'm going to make it a SIM. And to a certain extent, it's still doing a lot of these things, but I've simplified it tremendously. So here we have the case tracking, indicator database, and adversary database. And as you can tell, it can definitely be done, but it gets very complicated very fast. So, sort of went back to my roots and took the lessons learned Yoda here. So, and really like the basics of threat intelligence that I see are that you're going to start out with attacks, and then, or in this case, attacks can also be investigations, and then you're going to be able to map those together to identify potential campaigns, and then campaigns, once you get enough of those associated and you can map enough of those together, maybe you can map them to an adversary and determine what their TTPs are. So I simplified it tremendously and said, all right, well, if I were to create a tip from scratch, these are the things that I would really want. So I have my attacks or investigations that I would just be recording, same as we're doing today, and then periodically being able to go in and identify campaigns, and then also trying to discover the adversaries from that and what their TTPs are. And then from that, you would get your relevant threat intel, and the indicators, which we talked about in the pyramid of pain earlier. Those are sort of like the mitochondrions that hold everything together. So ideally what I was doing was I was trying to look for a way that I could pivot around. So I could start with, say, a particular attack, and I could say, well, what indicators are associated with that attack? Or I could start with a campaign and see, well, what attacks are associated with that campaign, and who's the adversary associated with that, and what the indicators are. So it essentially allowed you to start from any source and determine other stuff associated with it. And then that allows you to see the gaps and fill in where you need. So that turned out to something like this, where created basically a database schema here where you have one for each. So you have an indicators, attacks, campaign, and adversary tables. And the indicators maps to attacks. And then on the second one, the attacks map to the campaign names map to adversaries, and then finally just the information about the adversary. And so the things that are in parentheses there, that's data that could be derived. And so I was just trying to get a view where all right, if I was an analyst, what would I want to see? And all right, well, maybe it would be these pages, and the data would be based on, maybe like an attack ID, but I could also pivot off that to determine indicators or adversaries in the case of the attacks table. So I tried to simplify that more. So it basically looks like this. If you notice, I guess the color's brown there, but I added in some other things that I thought were important. So especially with your indicators, you have the cyber kill chain phase. So whatever phase or whatever your framework is. So whenever you extract an indicator, you really need to make a educated guess on what phase of the attack chain it's associated with. And then there's also notes, so I didn't want to make it too complicated, so just have this big text area where you could just write notes. And then also tagging, really trying to keep that structure. And I did the same thing with the attacks table, campaigns table, and the adversary table. And so it ends up, looking something like this. So you can basically take this structure and, maybe create it in Access or whatever you have access to. But ideally, you would really want to, hopefully there's a product out there that would, collect all the sort of data. So another thing that I did was, really going out and looking at all the different products and things that are, and services that are out there. So on the bottom, on the vertical axes there's, just some base, information type systems that can be adapted into a tip versus, all the way at the top where you have a tip, it's designed to be a tip. And then of course on the horizontal axis, you get, commercial or you pay money for versus free. And so there's a lot of different solutions that are out there, and the solution that you pick is, first on what you have access to. Maybe you have a Splunk just sitting there and no one's really using it that much, or you have admin access to it, so you can slice off a little piece of that and go use that. Or maybe same thing with the SIM, like if you're using Awesome or if you're using ArcSight or whatever SIM, right? And maybe they would let you use that, or if you happen to be the SIM operator, you can just build it and use that. There's SharePoint. Most organizations have a SharePoint instance, and you can kind of create your own websites. And although I hate SharePoint, if you have nothing, it's better than nothing, right? So it's a place to start. So you can at least maybe start there, show the value that you're learning from it, and then maybe you can get some funding to use some other resources. On the bottom right, so there's my little Evernote thing, really cheap, $50 a year or whatever. And so you'd use something like that. Maybe you could use like a wiki. So the Elk stack, is everybody familiar with that? So just a nice, big data type structure that you can put data in and search. And so it's similar to Splunk, but it's open source. There's CouchDB, which I kind of like that because it's a NoSQL. So, because I realize that at least starting out, I'm not going to know what I need, right? So I like something that, like these NoSQL databases that are flexible. So if later I decide that I need to add something, I can just add a column for it, and it doesn't break the whole system. So there's Mantis in the top right, which was a reference implementation of a tip, but I don't see it being developed that much. There's Crits, which is a system, another open source solution that you might want to check out. I really haven't had too much luck with that, but you may want to try it. They have I haven't. It was hard. Like I tried to get it installed and it just wouldn't work for me. But I just found out that they have a Docker container, so I need to try that out. There's RTIR, so that's just, RTIR is an open source case management system, but so you could possibly adapt that into your needs. And then lastly is this tool called ThreatNote, and so ThreatNote is being developed. I can't say it's Brian, and it's Wilder or something, I can't remember. But so this is a new tool that was started in September, and like all the little threat intelligence conferences and lists that I go to, ThreatNote seems to be kind of the it system right now. So although it's still in development, but it was easy to get installed. I have a review that I've done, but I haven't posted it yet. But it's a great system for starting that out. The only thing that I didn't like about it is it doesn't have a case management system, but the guy that's creating it is he's developing a lot of integrations with third-party tools so that you can pull in a lot of, like say you put an indicator in that's OS int, so you can go out and automatically pull like whois data. And also there's a kind of the case management system in threat intel is it's fast incident response, or FIR. And so the guy that's doing the ThreatNote, he's trying to, those two guys are working together so that they can integrate together nicely. But yeah, so there's lots of options, and it really just starts out with, hey, if there's something out there that you can use already, go and use it. Or if you have an extra box laying around and it's doing nothing, maybe you can throw one of these open source tools on it. All right, so the next step is to create the data. And this is basically the same as we've been doing like all these years, right? So as they investigate the new attacks and receive, information from partners, just analyzing these just like they normally would, but there's one small difference. It's instead of just investigating it, maybe trying to dig a little deeper and also pulling the indicators out and trying to map them to whatever intelligence framework that you're following. So in this case, so in an investigation, so the X represents where we actually stopped an attack, right? So in this case, we stopped it there, and normally that would be like, woohoo, AV worked, right? But then maybe digging in a little deeper and looking at, all right, well, this help.wmv file came from Leia at rebballs.com, and it was going to Obi-Wan at Jedi.com, and hey, check out this hilarious vid of me, right? And then maybe we go through our web server logs and we see this Viper user agent was around the same, like a few days before we got this email. All right, so we basically got some basic stuff there rather than just saying, yay, AV got it, and moved on. But the important part is we are pulling the indicators out of what we know, and we're documenting it into some framework of sorts here. So your analysts will just go and create indicators, or as they attack stuff, one of the additional steps is applying the indicators to the chain. So eventually you get somebody to step back doing some of the threat intel work and to look across everything. And it basically turns out to be something like this. So where you have 3 attacks, and you start looking at similarities between them. So the first one is like, hey, look, these two attacks 1 and 5 map in these particular ways. They're both using that same email, the Leia at rebballs.com, and the exploit has to do with some video that has help in it. So then you're kind of mapping that to some another attack, and you see tar 66 for install. That was both in attacks 5 and 9. And then for the C2, they're not exactly the same IP, but they're within the same class C. And then as part of that third one, there was some exfil associated with that, such as living Jedi.xls going out to another IP, which is in that same class C. So, looking at this and pulling these attacks together, we can call this a campaign, and we can get a good idea that, all right, well, they use these Viper things to go out and do recon. Really don't know too much about, maybe weaponization, maybe like they like to use video hosting sites, or maybe they're delivered by email through like a malicious attachment. And, delivery, they're coming from this Leia at rebballs.com. They like to use this particular rat called tar 66. And then the C2 is associated with that IP, and that they're usually the goal in this campaign was to find all the living Jedi that maybe Obi-Wan had. So really, so we can kind of summarize that campaign in that. But what you start doing is you get enough of these campaigns, and just like you went from attacks to campaigns, you can start to see you can map attack campaigns to your adversaries or your attackers, and really understand, their like how they do things. Like you don't necessarily have to identify them as, oh, it's Joe in China and this is his blog, right? We don't really care about that, but it's really just understanding, how they do things, so that whenever, then based on what you learn, you can feed these into your IDS systems or your IPSs, and so when an attack pops, instead of it being like this just random attack, it could be, you could classify it as like, oh, look, this is attacker ABC, associated, like they're doing the Order 66 campaign again. And then and then you learn more and more and more about them. So the more they attack, you learn more about them. So I'm not going to talk about measuring progress here, but there's some good models that are out there. Like if you go look up at the Lockheed Martin kill chain paper, there's a lot of ways that they have for classifying the data and determining. Basically, the goal is to stop the attackers sooner in the kill chain versus later, and so you can measure that and see your progress that way. There's also DML, which I forgot to put the graphic here, obviously, but that's a detection maturity level. That's another one that is out there. So there's a lot of ways. I haven't really finished it, as you can tell here, but there's some interesting ways that you can do it. So, but in conclusion, I think like if you're going to build your own threat intel system, first, find you and a few buddies that want to do this, try to get management buy-in, or, just do it yourself. Use the resources that you already have access to. Learn as much as possible about what threat intel is. Hopefully this presentation is a start to that. And then finally, as you're doing your investigations, don't just play whack-a-mole. Really, just dig a little deeper. And as you're doing your investigations, fill out the indicators in whatever or how those indicators fit in whatever chain you happen to be using, and then take a step back, look across all the different attacks, look for patterns, then to identify campaigns, and then from those from multiple campaigns, try to push back and identify adversary TTPs. So that's all that I have. I just want to give a big shout out to CarolinaCon for having me. Awesome. Let's see, so you can reach me on Twitter. So I'm grecs. A website there, and if you want to contact me, I have a contact form on my website, but if you want to contact me directly, you can either just hit me up on Twitter, or you can just do grecs@novainfosec.com. So are there any questions? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Go ahead. Yeah, there's a good, there's some threat intel books. I haven't dug deep into them, so I don't have a recommendation, but there's a guy there's going to be one, and I should have put it in here, and I forget the name of it, but if you ping me, I'll definitely find it. So coming in, it's Kyle Max something, but he and a few other people that I really trust in the threat intel community are, they're coming out with a book in September, I believe, and I haven't seen it, but I would really trust what they put out versus some of the other threat intel books that are out there. So whenever I actually did a post on it on my website, so if you go there and just search for threat intel book, it'll probably pop up. Any other questions? All right, well that's it. Well, thank you for having me.